All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Austin Tableau user group, broadcasting live here from the Brewatorium. Let me go ahead and turn my video on there. There we go. We have a big room full of folks here. Hopefully you can see them live there on video. We have a nice little Zoom recording set up. Thank you, Homer, for bringing the equipment. So we're doing an in-person event here at the Brewatorium in Austin. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you guys want to join us in the future, please feel free to join us. We'll be sending out invites for another event in December. So look for that. So again, before I get started, I always like to thank everybody that helped put on these events, especially for events like today, we're in person. And that's all the folks on our TUG Advisory Council that put in a lot of work, just preparing for this and getting the speakers together and the equipment and logistics. So big round of applause for the Advisory Council. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. If you would like to join our advisory council and you have any interest or talent in marketing or event planning or just like networking in general, please reach out to us, either myself or someone on the advisory council, and we'd love to have you attend our meetings. We meet every other week and just for like 30 minutes, and we plan these events. So if you're interested, please reach out to us. So we got a big event planned for you today. Very excited to be doing this live and in person. So here's the agenda. We're going to go over some general housekeeping announcements, talk about some upcoming events, and then we have our featured speaker, Amy Esselman, who is a data storyteller from Storytelling with Data, and she's going to be giving a great presentation on how to bring a dashboard story to life. And then afterwards, for those that are here, we will be having a happy hour as well. So again, it's a great event. We're really excited to be doing this live and in person. So again, for those of you that are virtual, remember that the meeting format, this is a live meeting. So we encourage you to turn on your cameras. The gallery viewing experience is best. So go ahead and turn that on. But do please observe customary Zoom etiquette. But we want this to be audience participation. So if you have questions for our speaker, please go ahead and put them in the chat or send them directly to Homer directly, and he will go ahead and collect those, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Also, we'd like to make these events always improve on our events, so we'll be sending out a survey later, as well as the materials from this event. Please go ahead and give us feedback. We'd love to hear from you. So just some housekeeping and announcements. We have it's hard to believe we only have 4 more TUGs left in the year. The holidays will be among us soon. So we have our September TUG, our next one, that's going to be on September 14th. And then we have the rest of the TUGs scheduled on the second Thursday of each month. And then we're doing another live in-person holiday event in December. We're still locking in the venue and the date, but that announcement should be made here soon. So stay tuned for that. And lastly, I'd like to say, if you have not joined our Slack community, please reach out to us. I know Nicole, if you could go ahead and put something, she's already on it. We want to put a link to join our Slack community. It'll be right there in the Zoom chat. Please join. We have a lot of great topics and channels there where we talk about a lot of different things and just share random interesting stuff. So please join our community. And then lastly, I'll give a little plug to Salesforce. They have the big conference coming up for Dreamforce. It's going to be December 12th through 14th. There is still some registration available. So if you'd like to come join and see that in person, it's an awesome event. It's in San Francisco. It's going to be great. Please, the link's at the bottom. Go ahead and join if you're interested in coming. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our featured speaker today, Amy Esselman, who is a data storyteller, like I said, with Storytelling with Data. And she works with a lot of clients on how to improve their presentations and communication and really help craft their data stories and narratives. So Amy, I would like to turn it over to you.
All right, fantastic. Can I get your being here, bear with us, folks. always the fun part, so
You know, to get you.
this setup, all right, how's this looking at everything?
It's coming up.
You're sharing these spots. There's your share. So you have some sort of like that. Stop. When in doubt, turn it off and turn it back on again. That's usually how it goes. Screen is hot. I know, we tested it, it all works. Stretch your head up too, maybe?
Yes, that.
All right. Whew. That just ate up a lot of time. I don't have a lot of time to present, and I'm standing in between you and cocktails. So I'm going to be very conscious of time today. Thank you everyone for joining us today in person and online. As Chris mentioned, my name is Amy. I'm one of the data storytellers at Storytelling Data. Been with the company for about 2 years now. Prior to joining, I held various roles in analytics and worked in Tableau. And I have since gone on to teach organizations and university students how to effectively communicate with data in order to inspire action. So what I have designed today is a very quick talk, a very abbreviated version of what we would typically do in a workshop. And it's very interactive. So I encourage you to participate in the discussion. If you're joining us virtually, please reach out in the chat window. And so to start us off in this frame of mind, I want to show you a dashboard and get your one-word reactions. This is going to be like this the whole time. All right. Okay. So in the room, just shout out your one-word reaction, and if you're in Zoom, please tell us in the chat window what you think about this dashboard. Busy. Fully orange. All right. What are they saying in the chat window, Homer? Thoughts on this dashboard?
Wow, okay. Meh.
All right. These are not very positive reactions. Probably not what the creator of this dashboard was hoping for. Now, the good news is that there is a fantastic story in here. And in our time together, we are going to pull out this story and present it in a manner that's going to lead to much more positive reaction. Okay, so we're going to go very quickly through some lessons. Now, typically when I do a workshop for clients, it's 4 hours long, and I have 40 minutes before you guys are going to get through beverages. So I need to go very abbreviated. But typically we cover this 5-step process where we start out with context. Thinking about your audience, the action you want them to take, and really honing your message before you even get into the visualization phase. Then we talk about choosing an effective visual. There's a number of ways that you can visualize any given data set. It really depends on your audience and the message you want to communicate. From there, we work to improve these visuals by decluttering, stripping away those unessential elements that get in the way of the data. And then now that we've made space for decluttering, we can add some stuff back in and focus attention on the most important information, the main takeaway we want our audience to see. And then we end our sessions with a story. And we learn about how to leverage story in components of the narrative arc to engage your audience, keep their attention, and hopefully inspire them to act on the information. So I don't have time to get through all that, but what I will go through today is a very abbreviated version of declutter, focusing story. So I'm assuming that you guys are already very attuned to your audience and what your message is. You already are adept at choosing an effective visual. You are likely already doing decluttering and focusing in your dashboard. And then we'll talk more about how you can bring a dashboard story to life. All right. So I'm going to demonstrate all of these lessons through a real world example. So this is an example through our client work. Obviously, it's been anonymized to protect the innocent. But I want to give you a little bit of context on this example before we dive in. So I'm going to put a block of text up on the screen momentarily. Just want you to read through it and then we'll discuss. So go ahead and give this a scan. You're thinking, what? I came to a Tableau user group about data story and she puts up a paragraph of text on the screen? What is happening? So hopefully you had time to get through all those words. Quick recap, we're going to assume for the next half hour that we work at a manufacturing company. Now, sadly, our manufacturing company has been falling behind and it's drastically impacting our performance. Now, our team has been tasked with looking at the data and figuring out what we can do to turn around this ship. We've got an eager colleague among us that has said they've pulled back the information in a dashboard and they're ready to get our feedback. Here it is. Giggle. Okay. Yes. Now, I don't know about you, but it is not immediately obvious to me what is going on within our organization or what opportunities we have to make improvements here. Now, I promise you that this story is in here somewhere and we are going to work to find it. And we're going to do so by going through these 3 steps. So we're going to start out talking about decluttering. Now, this is a very quick lesson, but a super powerful lesson when we are communicating information. We're going to talk not just about taking away things, but also thinking critically about what are the most important elements that we need to incorporate into our data visualizations to make sure that our audience knows what it is that they're looking at. So to start, I want you to think about a blank screen, a blank dashboard or a slide. Anytime you add an element to this, you are introducing something called cognitive burden for your audience. Doesn't sound great, does it? What that means is you are asking somebody to put time and attention towards understanding what it is you are showing them. And for that reason, you want to take a discerning eye at what it is you present. Because a lot of times, our visualizations and dashboards include things that our audience does not need to put time and attention to. Things that they can actually ignore. And those are the things that we want to identify in this lesson. Now, unfortunately, our tool, I don't want to pick on our tools, but our tools start us off with some defaults. Now, default settings are meant to reach a broad number of situations. So what happens in tools is they often over-index and try to do too much. So they'll include things in our data visualizations like grid lines, borders, data markers, things that are there taking up space, but are not actually adding information value. So those are some of the things that we want to eliminate from our dashboards and our reports, because if you put too much in there, you could overwhelm your audience. And you run the risk of your audience not wanting to put in the time and effort it takes to understand what it is you're presenting. And then you lose your ability completely to communicate with them. So you can contrast this with something more simplified that has less cognitive burden and actually makes less work for your audience and allows the data to stand out, which is what you want your audience to see. All right, really quick theory. Now we're going to dive into actually putting this into practice. Now we don't have time to go through this entire dashboard and declutter it, but I imagine that you are already thinking about ways to simplify this. Maybe get rid of all that orange. That's an option. So let's just focus in on one graph here. I'm going to focus in on this monthly capacity and demand graph, because it seems like it's going to be important for our story that we're going to want to share to our company about how we're going to make improvements. So just zooming in on this graph, what are some ideas that you have to make this easier to understand? Things that we could strip away or things we might need to add to bring clarity to this information. Go ahead and shout it out. If you're in the Zoom room, please enter your ideas in chat for me.
I think you need the numbers, but they're not working the way they are.
The numbers, the data
labels.
The data labels. What's not working about it?
Well, they're overlapping the bars.
Yeah. It's a little hard to read when you have overprinting numbers. So
Yeah.
definitely something to do there. What else could we do? Yeah, that's one idea.
Change the months to like actually the month titles.
Change the month to actually month titles. Also, do you notice anything about the months? The order of the month
I don't matter.
is going a little, recent is over here and the historical data is over there, a little counterintuitive. Any thoughts coming through the chat window?
Yeah, Molly says, remove the black outline.
Molly says remove the black outline. Yeah, a lot of times we don't need borders. Adding additional burden, we can get away without them or thinking about using white space. Is there an idea back here?
Yeah, like, I just use one,
Yeah. One bar.
Yeah.
And make it a stack bar. Yeah, we can think about,
get rid of one.
Yeah. there's different ways we can visualize it because pairwise bars like this are pretty dense and heavy. They have a lot of visual clutter. So maybe there's potential ways that we can view it differently.
No, my case says, line chart.
A line chart, right, that makes perfect sense. Lines are great for continuous data. We have time series data, probably the best use case for a line chart that would definitely lighten up this visual. All great examples. I've got a couple examples, many of the ones that were mentioned. First thing I'm gonna do is remove the border. So a lot of times we don't need borders around our visuals. We can leverage white space as a natural border without adding additional border. Speaking of borders, we can also get rid of the shading that's on the top of the title. We think that it's creating nice segments within our dashboards. We definitely do want to have some design and alignment within our dashboards, but a lot of times white space can help us do that. Notice how just those two really minor changes have a huge impact on how this visual feels. And we can do more. We can certainly take care of this data issue of how unintuitive it is. So it's not just about taking things away, but thinking about how you present the information in a manner that's going to be the easiest for your audience to understand. And when you arrange date in an order that's unintuitive, going from the newest date on the left to the oldest date on the right, you're making extra effort for your audience that doesn't need to be there. Now, if you work in an organization that's how you look at data and everybody's used to looking at data, then certainly continue with what the norm is. But for most cases, that's not how you would visualize data. So we can now order it from the oldest month on the left to the most recent data on the right. So that's going to make more sense to us. All right, now next I want to clean up what we like to call the graph skeleton at storytelling the data, and that's really just our axes and kind of the outside of the graph, not the data itself. So I'm going to start with this horizontal axis. Somebody had mentioned that we could write it out to make it more readable. We could do some work to pull out the years, make super categories. And I'm also going to get rid of this line on the bottom because when we have bars, we actually don't need that additional line because our eyes will make it appear that way anyways. Really subtle change, but it just takes one more thing away that your eyes don't need to process. Now I'm going to make some similar changes. I'm actually going to choose to add in a vertical axis. And as I do that, I'm going to have some tick marks just for reference and add a label. We're huge proponents of labeling our axes because you never want your audience to be guessing what they're looking at or worse, coming to the wrong conclusion about the data. So by adding an axis, we can add a clear title and then we know what we're looking at. Here it's just to make it thousands of hours. And when I did that, my tool decided to do some formatting for me because it thinks I know what I want. Again, tools are not always right. You should be questioning what they give you. And they give me 2 extra decimal places, which in some businesses, that level of specificity is useful, but a lot of times we don't need that level of detail. So what I can do is round these numbers. And if I do that, it gives me an opportunity to pull them into the ends of the bars. This is a little cognitive trick that we actually are taking 2 separate things together and we're tricking our brain into thinking they're just one. So it's reducing the amount of effort it takes us to look at it. Also, you'll notice you can start to see the shape of the data, which is what we would like our audience to see in the first place. So it's a super helpful approach. It is a little bit redundant having this vertical axes and the data labels. And so typically we would say choose one or the other. If you want just the shape of the data, then stick with the axes. You don't need the labels. If you need the precise values in the bars, and that's important, then get rid of the axes and just keep the data labels. Or maybe a balance where you have the axes and you're labeling just the most important points that you want your audience to see, not every single point. In this case, I'm going to choose to eliminate them. Gives a little bit of a lighter feel. All right, next thing I want to do is look at the top of the graph and deal with this title. Now, we plucked this out of a dashboard, so it's not exactly fair. The creator had a title on the dashboard, so you would know what you're looking at, but this by month right now is not helping us out. I do love that it is left aligned. We're huge advocates of left aligning chart titles. You'll notice here when you have a vertical axis and a chart title, it creates a nice framing, almost like a natural border for your graph anyways. But also studies tell us that absent any other visual cue, we will read a graph like we read books. Now, in Western culture, that means we start from the upper leftmost corner and then we do a zigzag Z pattern down the page. So I've left align my title. I know my audience will read that, and then they're going to be prepared to take in what I'm showing. But I think we can improve this title. I'm going to rewrite it a little bit, call it monthly project capacity versus demand. Now, how many of you have been looking at this legend the whole time since I changed that x-axis and have been like, what is she going to do about that? That looks terrible. It's so cluttered. I'm going to address that now. We can move that. You'll notice again how we read our graph. You won't get to that legend until the very end, and then you have to go back up to the graph to make sense of what color is which category. It's so much work we're asking our audience to do. So instead, we would recommend that you directly label if you can. So if you have lines, you can label them at the end. If you have bars, you could think about putting a subtitle in. In this case, I'm actually going to integrate the legend into the title itself and use something called similarity of color to visually tie these elements together. Because that's telling us that they're related and making it much easier to read. All right, this is a better view of the pairwise bars. I like the idea that somebody had about making these a line chart. Makes perfect sense. Look at how much space we have now. We have so much space here that we could go ahead and add some annotations and some additional context for our audience. The beauty of line graphs. I also like this other idea of making it a single bar chart. We can stack it. Now the bars are the total demand, but we're chunking that up into capacity and unmet demand. So still looking at the same information, but in a slightly different way. So check out the impacts. Each one of those changes that we went through was really minor, but taken all together has a significant impact on simplifying the visual and allowing the data to stand out for our audience. But we can't end there. We can't just simply declutter our graphs, give it to our audience and say, great, I'm done. No, we need to take it a step further and draw our audience's eyes to the data that's most important, the main takeaway, the message that we are trying to communicate. And that's what this next lesson is about, focusing attention. This is critical to getting your audience to engage in your data. You want the main message to be easy to find and quick to understand. So you want to draw your audience's eyes there. So if I design a graph, I know exactly where to look for the information, right? But how do I know that my user who's seeing this for the first time is going to look there? To answer that question, we like to do a little test called Where Are Your Eyes Drawn? Super simple test. All you have to do is look away from your visual, close your eyes, and look back. The first thing that you see is likely going to be what your audience sees as well. So if that's the thing you wanted to highlight, congratulations, you did a good job. If that is not what you wanted your audience to see, you want to go back to the design drawing board. So I brought a couple of images with me today, and I would like to do this Where Are Your Eyes Drawn test with you. So for folks in the Zoom session, go ahead and enter in chat what you see in each of these images as I put them up. I want to know the first thing that your eye goes to. Now you might notice a couple of different things, but I'm most interested in the first thing you see in each of these images. Okay, so in the room, shout it out. On Zoom, go ahead and put it in chat. Tell me, where are your eyes drawn in this image?
Stop sign.
Are they in agreement in the chat window, Homer? Almost unanimously, and immediately you were all drawn to that stop sign. Why? Red, yes, it's a different color than everything else. Centered in the middle.
It's an octagon.
It's an octagon, it's a different shape than everything else we have in the visual. There are so many things drawing our eyes there. It has text on it, that text is capitalized. This is a warning sign that we know as drivers. This, by the way, all of these things are things you can use in your data visualization. Size, color, position on the page, bold-faced font will really make the important information stand out. And we have an obvious focal point in this image. Got another image here. Tell me, where are your eyes drawn in this one? So they say anything. Sun. Anybody get drawn to the plane? Yeah, a couple of people. So when I first saw this, I also was drawn to that sun. It's such a bright circle and I'm looking at the sun. And then suddenly my peripheral view, I see the plane. So then I look at the plane. As I'm looking at the plane, the sun is tugging at my peripheral vision. Because this image has roughly, both of these objects have equal weights. And so what we're doing is introducing what's called visual tension for our audience. So you're not sure where to rest your eyes. So instead, when we are communicating information, we want to create what's called a visual hierarchy of information. Obvious top level and then sub levels underneath to navigate the information. So it's going to help get your information across more quickly, which is important because studies tell us we only have about 4 to 8 seconds to capture someone's attention. So by creating something that's scannable with visual hierarchy, we can get that information across much more quickly. Okay, one more, bear with me. Tell me, where are your eyes drawn in this image? Bars.
The top bars,
Orange bars, top bars. Folks could probably look at a couple different places. At the title, if you read it normal, maybe the bright blue is attention grabbing. You said you saw the orange in the dashboard. There's a lot of places that we want our audience to look, or our audience could look, but we want to put them in what is most important here. Now, there's a lot of things that we could highlight. So to start, let's just iterate to a grayscale. Love to start designing in grayscale because one, it feels unfinished. So you know you have to do a little bit more work. And you have to pause and think about, well, where would I introduce color to focus attention here? Instead of all the color, I could just use one color sparingly and thoughtfully to focus. Maybe it's on the capacity. The fact that our capacity is decreasing over time, maybe that's what I want my audience to see. And if I just give that the color and I add some words next to the data and use similarity of color to link them together, now I know that's where my audience's eyes will go. Or maybe it's the fact that we've been consistently over capacity. This is an issue that we think is leading to the project overwhelm at our organization and maybe the key to helping us solve this problem. Doesn't sound like a great story. Maybe I want to be a little bit more positive. Maybe I want to call it the fact like, hey, last month actually was the lowest level of unmet demand. So we're making some improvements there. So notice how when you highlight and add words to different areas of the graph, you're looking there and taking away what is the most important information. But why are we focusing there is the question. Why do I want my audience's eyes to be drawn there? And that leads us into the final lesson. I'm doing just a few more minutes, maybe, and then you can get your drinks, people, which is story. So story as of late is kind of having a moment. Everybody wants to be a data storyteller or tell stories with their data. It's kind of a buzzword. As somebody who has the job title data storyteller, who works at a company called Storytelling with Data, I think that's kind of cool. Good for us. But I think it does also add a little bit of confusion. What do we mean by telling a story in the party? So in the next few minutes, I'm hoping to clarify what we think that means and show you how you can apply it to your own work. Story is on a spectrum, so not everything that you do has to be full-blown story. Different situations will require maybe just a little bit of story. Others, if it's higher stakes, you maybe want to go full-blown story. Turns out stories are powerful. They're memorable. You think back to stories from your childhood, stories that you're reading right now or watching on TV. They keep you engaged. You tune in. You want to watch every week, and you remember what happened. And so we want to incorporate story into our dashboards to do the same things with our communications, engage our audience, keep them coming back, hopefully acting on the information. So I want to come back to this thought that story is on a spectrum. I want to talk about the minimum amount of story that you should include in your data communications. We call the story with a lowercase s. And this is really pairing words with your pictures and graphs. Again, thinking back to children's stories, this is how we learn. We took in information. We would hear the words, they'd be reinforced by the picture, would help us understand it, and would get us to be more likely to remember it. That's great. So she's doing similar things within our data communication. So all stories have words, so should our graphs. I know some people like to think data can speak for itself. I do not believe that is true. I think words actually help our data communication be more accessible to our audience. So a couple of places where you want to make sure that you have words, I mentioned it earlier, is in your titles. Have a clear graph title, a clear axis title, so your audience knows what they're looking at. You're not making assumptions. Also, don't assume that two people will walk away with the same conclusion about this spike in October. You can use words to annotate important points so that it's clear to your audience what is going on there. Another place to add words is in footnotes. It's a great place to have information for reference, and it's not going to be competing for attention. Don't feel like you always need to put all of the details of your analysis in the title, but you definitely want to incorporate that for folks that have questions. Most important thing you should have is what action you need your audience to do, what information, what's the recommendation, what are they going to do there? And don't assume that once you show them the data, it's a decluttered graph and you focus attention that they will immediately know what it is. Write it out in words, put it big, put it bold at the top so it's clear what they should do with that information. Now, another place where we see words is in the slide title at the top. Stories have words, annotate with text. Slide titles, dashboard titles, report titles. This is prime real estate. This is often going to be the first thing that your audience sees. And instead of putting a descriptive title, like sales over time, you should be putting an active takeaway title. Action needed, sales declining, or good news, we're meeting our goals. We're going to make our target. Sales are increasing. Put something there that tells your audience what is the takeaway instead of just describing what the information is. So this is the minimal amount of story you want to put around your visuals. Think about putting words paired with pictures that reinforce one another to help your audience understand and be able to act on the information accordingly. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have something called full-blown story with an uppercase S. And this is where we leverage the components of the narrative arc. So again, think about movies or TV shows that you're watching. We have a plot, a twist in the middle, and an ending. In the plot, we get introduced to the characters at the very beginning. And then something happens that throws those characters' world out of whack. And as the story goes on, the tension increases to this climactic point where the next thing that happens is going to make or break it for our characters. And somehow that tension gets resolved. And we have this little ending where we learn whether or not our characters are going to live happily ever after. So this narrative arc with plot, twist, and ending is a way to engage our audience and keep them tuned into our communication and be clear on how they should act. Now, I'm not suggesting you go into your next business presentation and tell a children's story. That would be silly. That is not what I'm suggesting at all, but that you leverage these components of the narrative arc in your communication. So the plot in a business setting is that background context. What is it that your audience needs to know to be prepared to take in what information you're presenting to them? The twists then are what's interesting in the data. Now, if it's not interesting, don't show it. I know I fell victim to this early on in my analytical career, that I would bring all of the data to the party. I wanted to be so prepared for any possible question that my audience would have. Yeah, I didn't want to just show them how robust my analytical efforts were, but all that did was confuse them, and it just distracted from the main message. So if it's not important to the message, put it in the appendix, keep it in your pocket, put it on a, one of those dashboard tabs all the way to the end or the end story point. You don't need everything in there, just the most important elements. And then the ending becomes that action. What is it that you need your audience to do? Make it clear and actionable. So we think about this structure and applying this to our project dashboard for our manufacturing company. Might look and sound something like this. Thanks, folks, for coming today. As you know, we have been running over projects, and so we looked into the data. We discovered that we have actually been over capacity 77% of the time over the last 9 months. And this is leading to poor performance as well as low employee morale. Now, our team dug into the data, and what I would like to do today is take you through the information we discovered and talk about what recommendations we are suggesting we take going forward. So to begin, I want to look at our project hours and thousands of hours over time. It turns out we started to see trouble about 9 months ago. Late last fall, we saw our capacity dip. And this was because the key resources left the company and we struggled to backfill them. We're very specific resources, and it was also a tough time of year to do recruitment. At that same time, we saw demand increase. And what that means is in January, we were over 2 times our capacity. We were really struggling. Now, that was probably the peak of our struggles, but we really have never recovered since then. We've consistently been over our capacity. So when we discovered this as we were doing our analysis, we dug deeper. We looked at specific regions, trying to figure out where the problem was. And when we got down to looking at capacity and demand by role, we saw something really interesting. So I'm going to switch views now to be looking at capacity versus demand by key roles. And you see for manager, support analyst, project manager here, they're pretty flat. That's not really where the issues are. What we discovered is that business analysts are pretty overburdened, 92%. So we have a lot of demand for this role, but we do not have enough resources to fulfill it. Even worse is our developers, which are over 200% overburdened. So what we are suggesting we do is look at ways to recruit developers and business analysts so we can get our business back on track and improve our employee count. So that's how you might walk your audience through this data stream, not just dropping them into the data immediately, but giving them some background context, animating through the information, focusing their attention on those key points. Now, if you're not presenting live and you need to say, create a single slide summary to send around, you're going to want to put the words that you would say out loud onto the page so that when somebody is consuming that information independently, they have enough information to understand what the story is. By the way, we still have the components of the narrative arc here. We've got the background on the fact that we are over capacity. We've got the interesting findings on what we discovered within the roles, and we have the action of what we need to do. We have the active takeaway title, so it's clear from the get-go what we need. And we're focusing attention and using color ever so sparingly and thoughtfully to get the main message across. So exact same information we had in our dashboard, but instead of data dumping all of the details on our audience, we are making data a pivotal part of an overarching story. So before we move to Q&A time, I just want to point out a few resources that you guys can have from Storytelling with Data that are completely free for you and your teams to use. We have a YouTube channel. We're posting multiple new videos every month. So if you subscribe, you can see short, quick tip tool tutorials, all the way to longer in-depth makeovers. We also have an online community at community.storytellingwithdata.com, free to sign up with an email. And we've got a number of examples to practice with. So this is an example that we anonymized from client work. We have a number of these also out on the community. If you want to practice some of these skills in a lower stakes environment, or just get access to our 20,000 community members, where you can ask questions, get feedback, or just get inspired by other people's work. We do have a few books. Our founder, Cole Nussbaum Affleck, has written 3 books. The original is Storytelling with Data that came out in 2015. That was born out of workshops that this original workshop that she created when she worked at Google. And so it has all of the lessons that we talked about today and more. The Let's Practice book has a number of those real world examples to work through. And then the latest book that came out this fall, the yellow book, is Storytelling with You, which is more around the presenting side of things. How do you create stellar slides and deliver them powerfully? So if you're somebody that does a lot of presenting, that's definitely a book to check out. We do have a couple of online virtual trainings. If anybody is interested, you can go to storytellingwithdata.com/workshops. The Storytelling with Data, we have a half-day, 4-hour session next week, and then another one scheduled in November that will go through those 5 lessons that I talked about at the beginning in more detail. You'll get more hands-on practice. And then we have a Storytelling with You session in October. So that goes through more of the slide design and presenting aspects. So check those out if you are interested. And with that, how am I doing time-wise?
Great.
Feel like I was better than that.
All right, Yeah,
Question?
yeah, thank you, Amy. So yeah, that's amazing. I just walking through that exercise and, in a handful of techniques, how you can craft a great story that is visually compelling and communicates effectively. So, I guess let's open the floor. Does anybody have any questions? From the audience there?
Yeah, one thing that stands out is when you're designing a visualization, you might have to kind of future proof it. So how do you know what to focus on if the data is changing kind of over time?
Yes, so if you're talking about like dynamic dashboards that are gonna update automatically.
Yeah.
That is harder to pick out a story because then the data has changed differently. There's a delineation we like to make between exploratory analysis and explanatory communications. So when you're exploring the data, you're looking for those stories, like what Tableau and interactive dashboards are fantastic for. You've got filters, you've got, drill downs, and you can get to any story or any segment of the information you want. But once you find something of note that you need to communicate to somebody for action, that's when you move into the explanatory communication phase, and you have to do things differently there. That's where really the focusing and telling a story is important, because you found that insight that you need somebody to act upon. Now, if I did that in a dashboard, then I'm only guiding people towards one path instead of all the potential opportunities they have with an interactive dashboard. So a story is more point in time versus dynamic, or if you update something, you might be updating the story depending on what the data is. So it's almost different use cases. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Good question. Are there any questions in the chat at all? Okay. Any other thoughts or questions from the group here in the room?
What are your recommendations for using color with regards to people who are colorblind?
Yes, so the question was about colorblind palettes. And so Tableau has a fantastic color palette that I would recommend using. You notice in this example, it was blue and orange. This is the color combination that we use a lot at storytelling with data. Our brand color is blue. We like the color blue, so we tend to use that to denote positive things. And then orange is a nice contrast. So it prints really well as well, and it's colorblind friendly. So for folks that aren't familiar with color vision deficiency, it's estimated that about 5% of individuals in Western culture have some form of color vision deficiency. And the most common one is being able to discern between shades of red and shades of green. So we love to do this red, amber, green color coding, but that actually disadvantages a pretty big segment of our audience. And so we would recommend that you avoid that and make sure that you have contrasting colors so that you don't see that. If you are going to use red and green, like some people have that as their brand color, there's no way of getting around it, Coca-Cola, right? In those cases, you might think about additional visual cues, like arrows, boldface font. It adds a little bit of clutter, but you'll make sure that you're being a little bit more clear for those folks. There are colorblind simulators. Obelisk is one of the most popular ones that we use. You can actually run your visual through that and see what somebody with like red or green blindness would be. Obelisk, GOV, yeah. I don't know that I would like Google it. Yeah, it's one simulator, a million will pop up. Colorblind simulator. COVLIS. Yes. I don't know what, like, if it's .com, I don't know the URL exactly, but Google it, it's like the first. Yeah, so Google colorblind simulator. There's lots of stuff out there.
Kevin's question, do you ever recommend ways or like provide for organizations ways for folks to templatize the story? So maybe the dashboard is dynamic, but before that they will be giving like a presentation, you're making it easier for analysts to actually do that? Or are you like crafting stories from scratch every time?
It depends on the situation. I know we've done a lot of work with like project management organizations where there's a lot going on and you want to get an update, and leadership is used to seeing, certain metrics in a certain spot. And if that is the case in your organization, I would not recommend flipping that upside down, because you're asking your audience to like go through a new learning curve. People do not like that. So I wouldn't stray too far from anything that's existing. Like if you're going to start applying these lessons, I wouldn't go to something that's existing or used a lot and start messing with it. It's great to test out in like lower stakes place, newer areas, new analyses, things that you're about to start, because then you don't have that kind of status quo bias or learning curve for your existing audience. unless they're open to it, and that's like an initiative you're undergoing. So just be thoughtful about how and when you partake in making changes. And sometimes be met with a little bit of resistance. But good question.
Any other questions somewhere in the chat?
All right, well, I do have just one quick summary slide of what we talked about. So decluttering, just stripping away those unessential elements. Ask yourself if you really need it. If you're ever in doubt, you can always ask somebody else for feedback. I highly recommend that. For somebody that's unfamiliar with the topic, they will give you great feedback because they're not as close to the information as you are. Focusing by using color sparingly, not to categorize like we do when we're exploring our data, but when we're explaining our data, we want to use it strategically and sparingly to focus attention. And then leverage the components of the narrative arc plot, just in any of them, that's going to keep your audience tuned in and engaged. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for